There is a place you lived before your mother's womb, a dimension where your soul existed, conscious and aware, standing in the presence of God Himself. Most people never think about this. They assume life begins at conception, that consciousness sparks into being when cells divide. But Padre Pio saw something different. He saw the truth that the Church has always taught, but rarely speaks about plainly. Your soul was created by God at a specific moment in eternity, and it existed somewhere before it entered your body. And what he saw about that place, about what happened there, will change how you understand your entire existence. In the monastery of San Giovanni Rotondo, there lived a priest who could see through the veil between heaven and earth, as easily as you see through glass. Padre Pio's eyes perceived more than the physical world. When he looked at a person, he saw their soul as clearly as their face. He saw the state of grace or sin, the presence of guardian angels, the scars left by every choice. But his sight reached even further back than that. He could see the origin point, the moment of creation, the chamber of souls where each person's existence truly began. And what he witnessed there terrified and amazed him in equal measure. This is what Padre Pio saw. He saw a vast space that was not a place in the way we understand places. It existed outside of time, in the eternal now where God dwells. In this space, souls were being created, one after another, each one a deliberate act of divine love. God spoke each soul into existence, forming it from nothing, giving it consciousness, intelligence, will, and the capacity for eternal life. These souls were not yet joined to bodies. They were pure spirit, radiant and aware, standing in the immediate presence of their Creator. And here is what shook Padre Pio to his core. Each soul in that moment of creation was shown something. God revealed to each newly created soul a vision of the life it would live on earth. Not every detail, but the essential pattern. The family it would be born into, the struggles it would face, the temptations that would assault it, the graces that would be offered, the choice it would have to make between heaven and hell. Each soul saw its own future like a map spread before it. And in that moment before birth, before time, each soul had to accept or reject the journey God was offering. This is not a popular teaching today. The modern world wants to believe that souls are accidents, that consciousness emerges from matter, that we are nothing more than evolved animals with no existence before or after this life. But Padre Pio saw the truth that saints and mystics have always known. Your soul is older than your body. It came from somewhere, and in that somewhere, you made a choice that set everything in motion. Let me show you what he saw in greater detail. In the first vision, Padre Pio witnessed the moment of a soul's creation. God spoke, and suddenly there was a new consciousness that had never existed before. This soul opened its eyes, if we can call them that, and found itself surrounded by infinite light. Not the light of the sun, but the light of God Himself, pressing in from all sides, warm and overwhelming and utterly real. The soul felt loved in a way that no earthly love could match. It felt known, seen, understood completely. And in that moment, the soul was filled with a joy so intense that every moment of earthly happiness combined would be like a single drop compared to an ocean. But then God showed the soul something else. The vision changed, and the soul saw earth. It saw a world broken by sin, filled with suffering and confusion and death. It saw the specific life it would live, a family struggling with poverty, a body that would be weak and prone to illness, friends who would betray, desires that would war against the spirit, moments of crushing loneliness, the constant pull towards selfishness and pride and lust. The soul saw all of this, and it recoiled. Why? The soul asked without words. Why must I go there? Why must I leave this light and enter that darkness? And God answered, not with words, but with another vision. He showed the soul the reason, the purpose, the plan. This life on earth was not punishment. It was opportunity, a chance to choose love freely, to become more than just a created thing. In heaven, surrounded by God's immediate presence, choosing good was easy, almost automatic. But on earth, in the fog of matter and time, choosing good would cost something. It would require faith, sacrifice, courage, and every time the soul chose God despite the difficulty, it would grow. It would become stronger, deeper, more radiant. It would develop a capacity for love that could never be formed in heaven alone. God showed the soul the person it could become, a saint, someone who radiated his love to others, someone who brought light into darkness, someone who would spend eternity in a joy even greater than what it felt now, because it would be a joy earned, chosen, fought for. But then God showed the soul the other possibility, the person it could become if it chose wrongly. He showed the soul what would happen if it rejected grace, if it closed its heart, if it chose pride over humility, pleasure over goodness, self over God. He showed the soul hell, not as a threat, but as a warning. This is what you could choose, God said. This is what happens when a soul uses its freedom to reject love completely. The soul trembled. It saw the stakes. It understood, perhaps for the first time, that existence was not a game. This was real. The choices it would make on earth would echo into eternity. Every moment would matter. Every decision would count. And then God asked the question that every soul must answer. Will you go? Padre Pio saw that most souls said yes. They accepted the mission. They agreed to be born, to enter time, to face the test. They knew it would be hard. They knew they might fail. But they trusted that God's grace would be enough, that His love would sustain them, that the goal was worth the struggle. And so they descended from that place of light into the waiting bodies their mothers carried, becoming human, entering history, beginning the journey that would determine their eternal destiny. But Padre Pio also saw something else. He saw souls who hesitated, who looked at the suffering they would face and felt afraid, who saw the temptations that would assault them and doubted they could resist. These souls did not reject God outright, but they clung to Him, reluctant to let go of His immediate presence, terrified of the isolation they would feel on earth. What happened to these souls? They still went, because the agreement had already been made at a higher level. But they went with fear instead of trust, and that fear marked them. Throughout their lives on earth, they would struggle with anxiety, with a sense of abandonment, with the feeling that they were alone in a hostile universe. Not because God had left them, but because they had never fully accepted the necessary distance that makes earth different from heaven. And Padre Pio saw a third group, a smaller group, souls who looked at what God showed them and hardened their hearts. They saw the life of sacrifice and service they were being offered, and they wanted no part of it. They wanted glory without suffering. They wanted love without cost. They wanted heaven without the journey. These souls were not demons. Demons are fallen angels, a different category of being. But these were souls who, even before birth, began to set themselves on the path that leads away from God. They still descended into bodies. They still lived lives on earth. But from the beginning, they were swimming against the current of grace. They entered the world already half-turned toward hell, and unless they experienced a powerful conversion, they would continue that turn throughout their entire existence. Here is the theological truth behind what Padre Pio saw. The Church teaches that God creates each soul individually and directly. Your soul is not passed down from your parents like genes or eye color. It is a completely new creation, made by God at the moment of conception. This is different from what some ancient philosophers believed. They thought souls existed in some kind of waiting room before birth, already complete, just looking for bodies to inhabit. That is not the Christian teaching. But there is a mystery here that goes deeper. Time is a created thing. God exists outside of time. In the eternal now where God dwells, your creation, your life, and your death all exist simultaneously. From God's perspective, He is creating your soul, watching your life, and welcoming you into heaven, or confirming your choice of hell all at once. There is no before and after for God. So when Padre Pio saw souls existing before birth, he was not seeing them in a different time. He was seeing them from God's perspective, from the viewpoint of eternity. He was witnessing the moment of creation not as a past event, but as an eternal present reality. Your soul stands before God right now, even as you read these words, accepting the mission of your life. Because in eternity, you are always at every point of your existence at once. This is why Padre Pio could sometimes tell people things about themselves that seemed impossible to know. He could see the choice they had made before birth. He could see whether they had accepted their life with trust or fear or resistance. He could see the plan God had laid out for them and how far they had strayed from it or how faithfully they were following it. There was a young woman who came to Padre Pio for confession, troubled and confused about her vocation. She felt pulled toward religious life, but her family wanted her to marry. She did not know what to do. Padre Pio looked at her and said, "You knew before you were born that this choice would come. You saw it, and you said yes to it then. Why do you doubt now?" The woman was stunned. How could he know such a thing? But Padre Pio saw it clearly. He saw her soul in that moment before incarnation, looking at the life God offered, seeing this exact dilemma, and accepting it as part of her path. She had agreed to face this test. Now she needed to trust the choice she had made in that place of perfect clarity, before the fog of earthly confusion set in. She entered the convent 6 months later and became a faithful nun who brought countless souls to God through her prayers and service. But there was another case. A man came to Padre Pio filled with rage and bitterness. He had suffered terrible things in his life: abuse as a child, betrayal by his wife, the death of his children in an accident. He shook his fist at God and demanded to know why he had been cursed with such a life. Padre Pio did not answer with platitudes or easy comfort. Instead, he said something that shocked everyone who heard it. "You saw this life before you were born, and you chose it. You agreed to carry this cross because you saw what it would make you. But now you are trying to throw it down, and that is why you suffer twice." The man was enraged. He denied it. How could he have chosen such pain? But Padre Pio did not back down. He explained that the man's soul, before birth, had been shown 2 paths. One was an easy life, comfortable and pleasant, but spiritually shallow. The other was the hard life he now lived, full of suffering, but with the potential to transform him into a great saint. The man's soul had chosen the harder path because it wanted to become more than what an easy life could make it. But now, in the midst of the suffering, the man had forgotten that choice. He had turned against his own mission. Padre Pio told him, "Remember who you were in that place. Remember what you wanted. You did not want comfort. You wanted God. And God has given you exactly what you asked for, the fire that burns away everything but love. Stop fighting it. Embrace it. And you will find that the suffering you curse is actually the mercy you begged for." The man wept. Something in those words struck a chord so deep that he could not deny it. He felt the truth of it in his bones. And from that day, his life did not become easier, but he became stronger. He stopped fighting against his cross and started carrying it with purpose. And in his final years, people who knew him said he radiated a peace and wisdom that could only come from someone who had been refined by fire. This is the core of what Padre Pio saw. Your life is not random. It is not accidental. Before you were born, your soul stood before God and saw the path He was offering. You saw the joys and the sufferings, the graces and the temptations, the easy moments and the crushing trials, and you said yes, not because you were forced, but because you trusted that God's plan for you was better than any plan you could make for yourself. But here is where it becomes even more profound. Padre Pio also saw that in that moment before birth, each soul was given a specific measure of grace designed for its particular mission. If you were going to face terrible temptations, you were given powerful grace to resist them. If you were going to suffer great losses, you were given deep wells of strength to endure them. If you were going to be called to a difficult vocation, you were given the exact gifts needed to fulfill it. Nothing was left to chance. God does not send souls into battle without weapons. He does not ask them to climb mountains without giving them the strength to reach the summit. Every soul is equipped for exactly the life it will live. The tragedy, Padre Pio saw, is that most people never access the grace they were given. They live their entire lives using only a fraction of the spiritual resources available to them. Why? Because they do not ask. They do not pray. They do not open themselves to the very grace that was prepared for them before they were born. They try to live on their own strength, and then they wonder why they fail, why they fall, why they feel so weak in the face of temptation. Padre Pio would tell people, "You have everything you need already. God gave it to you before you took your first breath. But you have to claim it. You have to ask for it. You have to use it." And when people did, when they finally started praying seriously, going to confession, receiving the sacraments, opening their hearts to the grace that was always there waiting, they were astonished at how their lives changed. Not that suffering disappeared, but that they suddenly had the strength to face it. Not that temptation vanished, but that they found they could resist it. Not that confusion lifted, but that they felt guided, even in darkness. This is the practical application of what Padre Pio saw. If you are struggling right now, if you feel overwhelmed by your life, if you are facing trials that seem too big to bear, remember this. You saw this coming. Your soul, standing in the presence of God before you were born, looked at this exact moment and said yes to it. You agreed to face this, and God equipped you with everything you need to overcome it. But you have to access that equipment. You have to pray. You have to ask God for the grace He has already set aside for you. You have to believe that the life you are living is not a mistake or a punishment, but a mission that you yourself accepted when you had perfect clarity and stood in the light of divine truth. There is also a warning here. Padre Pio saw that some souls, after birth, completely abandoned the mission they had accepted. They saw the cost and decided they did not want to pay it anymore. They turned away from God's plan and tried to write their own story. And what happened to them was tragic. Their lives became hollow. They achieved what they thought they wanted: money, pleasure, power, admiration, but found that it meant nothing, because deep in their souls, they knew they were off course. They felt the dissonance between what they were doing and what they were made for. And when they died, Padre Pio saw what awaited them. They stood before God again, no longer in the innocence of pre-birth, but in the full knowledge of what they had done and failed to do. And God showed them the same vision He had shown before they were born. He showed them the person they could have become, the good they could have done, the love they could have shared. And the souls saw what they had thrown away. The grief was unbearable. Some souls, in that moment, broke with remorse and cried out for mercy, and God's mercy met them. But others hardened even further. They looked at what they had lost and blamed God for it. They refused to take responsibility for their choices, and in that refusal, they confirmed their own damnation. Hell, Padre Pio understood, is not God's punishment. It is the soul's final choice. The soul that rejects God before birth and continues that rejection through life simply makes that rejection permanent at death. God does not send anyone to hell. People choose it by refusing the mission, the grace, the love that was offered to them from the very beginning. But heaven, Padre Pio saw, is the fulfillment of the yes that was spoken before birth. When a soul that accepted its mission, endured its trials, used its grace, and stayed faithful to the end, stands before God at death, there is a moment of recognition. The soul sees that it has completed what it set out to do. It looks back over its life and sees that every moment of suffering had purpose. Every temptation resisted made it stronger. Every act of love brought it closer to the goal. And the joy that floods the soul in that moment is the same joy it felt when it was first created, but multiplied 1,000 times, because now it is not just received, but earned. The soul has become what it was always meant to be. Padre Pio lived with this vision constantly. When people complained about their lives, he saw souls who had forgotten their own choice. When people despaired, he saw souls who had lost touch with the grace they were given. When people sinned, he saw souls turning away from the path they themselves had agreed to walk. And his response was always the same: remember. Remember who you are. Remember where you came from. Remember what you agreed to. Remember that you are not a victim but a volunteer. You chose this life because you saw that it could make you a saint. Now live like someone who is becoming a saint. This is not easy teaching. It demands that we take responsibility for our lives in a way that modern culture does not like. We want to blame our parents, our circumstances, our genetics, our trauma. And yes, all of those things are real. They shape us. They affect us. But underneath all of that, there is a deeper reality. Your soul stood before God and said yes to the very family, the very circumstances, the very struggles you now face. You said yes because you saw that they were exactly what you needed to become, who you are meant to be. Does this mean we should not work to change bad situations? No. Does it mean we should passively accept injustice or abuse? Absolutely not. Padre Pio was fierce in defending the vulnerable and fighting against evil. But it does mean that we approach our lives with a different spirit, not as victims crying out against fate, but as warriors who knowingly entered the battle and were equipped to win it. You have everything you need. God gave it to you before you were born. The grace is there. The strength is there. The gifts are there. You just have to claim them. You have to pray. You have to ask. You have to believe that the God who showed you this life before you lived it has not abandoned you in the living of it. Padre Pio saw one more thing that must be shared. He saw that for each soul, there was a specific moment in life, sometimes several moments, when the full force of grace would be offered. A moment when God would pull back the veil and remind the soul of its origin, its mission, its destiny. For some, this came through a near-death experience. For others, through a powerful encounter with beauty or truth. For others, through suffering so intense that it broke through all the noise and distraction. And in that moment, the soul had to choose again. It had to renew the yes it spoke before birth, or it had to turn away definitively. Padre Pio could often predict when these moments were coming for people. He would tell them, "Soon you will be tested. Soon you will have to choose. Remember what I have told you. Remember who you are." And when the moment came, those who remembered, those who recognized it for what it was, passed through it and emerged transformed. But those who were not prepared, who had not been listening, often stumbled and fell. This might be that moment for you. This might be why you are hearing this now. Your soul, which stood before God before you were born and saw this very moment, this very decision, is calling out to you. It is reminding you of the choice you made in that place of light. You said yes to this life. You said yes to these struggles. You said yes because you trusted that God's grace would be enough. Now you have to live that yes. You have to claim the grace that has always been yours. You have to step into the mission you volunteered for before time began. What does that look like practically? It looks like prayer, real prayer. Not just words thrown at the ceiling, but actual conversation with the God who created you and knows you better than you know yourself. It looks like the sacraments, confession to clear away the debris that blocks grace, communion to receive the strength you need. It looks like obedience to what you know is right, even when it is hard. It looks like choosing love when hate would be easier. It looks like forgiveness when bitterness would feel better. It looks like sacrifice when comfort calls. It looks like becoming who you saw you could become when you stood in the presence of God before you were born. Padre Pio carried his stigmata, the wounds of Christ, in his hands and feet and side for 50 years. People asked him constantly how he endured the pain. He told them, "I saw this before I was born. I saw these wounds and I said yes to them because I saw what they would do. They would draw souls to God. They would prove that Christ still suffers in his mystical body. They would be a sign of love. How could I refuse that, even knowing the cost?" He lived what he taught. He remembered. And he became exactly what his soul, standing before God in eternity, had agreed to become. You have the same choice. You can spend your life fighting against the very mission you accepted, complaining about the cross you agreed to carry, wasting the grace you were given. Or you can remember. You can wake up to the truth that your existence is not an accident, but a sacred agreement between your soul and God. You can claim the power that has always been yours. You can become the saint you were created to be. The souls waiting to be born still stand before God right now, in the eternal present, looking at the lives they will live, making their choice. And somewhere in that timeless place, your soul still stands there too, seeing your whole life spread before it, saying yes to every moment, trusting that the God who offers the mission will provide everything needed to complete it. That soul has not stopped existing. It is the deepest part of you, the part that knows the truth even when your mind forgets. Listen to it. Remember what you agreed to, and live like someone who chose this life because they saw it could make them eternal.